wherein a lady is found dead in the most inconvenient location, and Lord Peter makes an observation about umbrellas, glass eyes, and Victorian melodrama. "My dear Bunter," said Lord Peter Wimsey, pausing mid-step beneath the sagging eaves of a dripping portico, "when one finds a corpse reclining in a chaise longue in the conservatory, one expects at the very least a theatrical note or a tipped-over cocktail glass. This is simply poor staging. The rain, never content with mere precipitation, had taken on a resentful, sideways character as it lashed the windows of Greystones, a minor but stubbornly Gothic estate in Shropshire, squatting like an aging dowager in mourning lace amidst sodden holly and disapproving elms. The house belonged to Lady Margaret Halberton, widow of that esteemed but ill-tempered industrialist, Sir Thomas Halberton, and long reputed by gardeners, drapers, and the editor of the Parochial Informer to be as formidable in etiquette as she was in bridge dot. She was also, at present, dead. The discovery had been made, with the appropriate shriek and fainting spell, by her companion, Miss June Lovelace herself, of fragile constitution, and perpetually half a sneeze away from invalidism. Miss Lovelace, under sedation and several layers of tartan blanket, now reclined in the morning-room, murmuring phrases like "glass eyes," and "the lily were never meant to bloom in June," which the village doctor assured everyone was merely the nerves. Wimse. Why had not intended to be there at all. He had been on his way to inspect a peculiar collection of 17th century walking sticks and much Codley, and had accepted an invitation to tea at Greystones only because the weather had made the roads resemble bogs in a bad mood. It had not occurred to him that the tea would be accompanied by death, though he was not, he confessed, entirely displeased. The scene was both typical and subtly wrong. Lady Margaret Halberton lay supine on the chaise longue, one gloved hand resting on her abdomen, the other trailing elegantly to the floor. Her expression was composed, dignified, faintly reproachful, as if death had interrupted her mid-sentence, and she had not quite forgiven it. She wore her usual string of pearls, heavy and impeccable, and Wimsey noted with narrowing eyes, unmistakably still in place. "A stroke?" offered Inspector Frampton of the local constabulary, a man of good intentions and insufficient curiosity. "No sign of struggle, no marks. Doctor says it could be the heart." "She was not a woman to indulge in cardiac spontaneity," Wimsey replied. "Routine, dear Frampton." Lady Halberton was the human embodiment of boiled beef on Wednesdays. If she died suddenly, it was because someone else had taken her schedule in hand. He strolled the length of the conservatory, pausing to examine a half-wilted lily and the placement of a lacquered umbrella stand. Bunter, who had silently appeared with a dry coat over his master's shoulders and a notebook at the ready, cleared his throat in the way of discreetly prompting deeper attention. "Tell me, Frampton, do we know who was in the house last night?" The Inspector consulted a small book with the reverence of one recalling a religious text. "The usual residents, my lord. Lady Margaret, Miss Lovelace, the housekeeper, Mrs. Platt, the footman Edward, the cook, and the gardener, though he sleeps, in the west cottage. And of course young Mr. Halberton was here, arrived yesterday." "Ah, yes," murmured Wimsey. The prodigal son, with a foreign accent and a taste for abstract oils. "Returned from the continent, I presume, with wild theories about art and probably socialism." Frampton looked uncomfortable. Something of that sort. But he was very devoted to his mother. Were we all? Said Whimsy vaguely. He tapped his cane once against the stone floor, then peered at the glass roof above. Tell me, has anyone remarked that all the doors were locked, the windows latched, the jewelry untouched, and yet a woman is dead with nothing wrong at all, save for being extremely so? Frampton opened his mouth, but Whimsy was already humming a bit of the Mikado and staring into the corner where a patch of damp had formed a surprisingly ecclesiastical shape. One wonders, he mused aloud, why the pearls are still in place, but the orchid from her lapel is missing. There was a pause. What orchid, my lord? Precisely. Outside the wind rose like an organ note, and somewhere in the garden a branch cracked with theatrical timing. Whimsy turned, his eyes twinkling not with mischief, but with mild, anticipatory disdain. Bunter, he said, make inquiries. I suspect we shall find the orchid, but not where we expect it. In the meantime, let us interview the help. One never knows what might fall from a servant's recollection when properly dusted. And with that, Lord Peter Whimsy strolled back into the house, humming faintly, the corners of his mouth twitching in time with a thought not yet ready to be spoken. Indeed, said Lord Peter Whimsy, flicking a speck of something unidentifiable from his lapel as he moved from the conservatory to the dimly paneled hallway. Let us begin with Mrs. Platt. Housekeepers, like kings and gardeners, always know more than they admit, but are curiously reluctant to confess it until pressed with just the right mixture of civility and disdain. Bunter, who had already glided ahead with the unspoken efficiency of an ambassador rather than a valet, returned in seconds. Mrs. Platt is in the still-room, my lord. Distraught, but composed. She has fortified herself with a thimble of brandy. Medicinally. Whimsy gave a slight bow. Ah, the Anglo-Saxon method of mourning. Let us tread gently, Bunter. She is, I imagine, the sort of woman who files teaspoons by denomination and dreams of punctuality. The still-room, a high-ceilinged chamber smelling faintly of lavender polish and repressed judgment, housed a tall, stern woman whose graying bun might have survived small wars and frostbite. She rose, not without dignity, and made a curtsy so subtle it suggested she had not practiced it since Edward VII was alive. I do beg your pardon for my appearance. My lord, she said, it has been a difficult morning. My dear Mrs. Platt, said Whimsy, settling into a narrow-backed chair with feline grace, the situation is one that would excuse even outright dishevelment. You, however, are as unflappable as an unopened telegram. May I ask, when did you last see Lady Halberton? Last night, sir, at approximately 9:30. She rang for me to remind cook about her breakfast poached sole, half a grapefruit, and a single piece of toast. She always said that scrambled eggs were for the morally indifferent. A position with which I am half inclined to agree, murmured Whimsy. And how did she seem? Perfectly well, my lord. Perhaps a little fatigued. She had taken a turn about the garden at sunset, which was not her usual habit. I remarked upon it to Edward, the footman, after supper. Unusual indeed, said Whimsy, leaning back, fingers steepled. Had she mentioned any visitors, any letters, anything out of the ordinary? Nothing, my lord, though. Here Mrs. Platt paused, ever so slightly. She did ask me whether the greenhouse was still being locked of an evening. I said it was. I'd check it myself. Whimsy raised an eyebrow. The greenhouse? Yes, sir. It opens into the conservatory, but she disliked the smell of earth after dark, said it reminded her of cemeteries. And yet she was found there this morning amidst the lily. Tell me, Mrs. Platt, who has keys to the greenhouse. Only myself, Mr. Edward, and Miss Lovelace. But the door has not been tampered with. I am quite sure of that. Whimsy inclined his head. Thank you. One last thing, if I may was. Lady Halberton wearing her usual jewelry when you saw her last? The pearls, yes. Always the pearls. She never removed them except at bedtime, and even then only after locking them in the little walnut box on her dressing-table. But she hadn't yet retired when I saw her. And her orchid? Mrs. Platt's forehead wrinkled in polite confusion. Orchid, sir? Whimsy smiled benignly. No matter. Thank you, Mrs. Platt. You've been as clear as a still pond. Back in the hallway, he turned to Bunter. We must examine the greenhouse, but not yet. I wish first to speak with the companion, Miss Lovelace. Something tells me she may have seen more than lily and glass eyes. They found Miss Lovelace still in the morning-room, with a shawl round her shoulders and a bottle of smelling salts clenched in one gloved hand, like a defensive weapon. She was a woman of indeterminate age and exaggerated delicacy, whose every breath seemed an apology for having lungs at all. My lord, she whispered, I can hardly bear to speak of it. The vision, it was like something from the mysteries of Udolpho. Her face so composed, so still like marble, and the pearls. Ah, yes, the pearls, said Whimsy gently, still fastened neatly round her neck. Were they not? They were. That's the curious part. Not a thing touched. And yet I knew, the moment I saw her, I knew she was gone. Very perceptive of you, said Whimsy. Tell me, did Lady Halberton often take walks in the garden at night? Never, said Miss Lovelace, sitting straighter than seemed advisable for someone allegedly feeble. She had a dread of mists and bats, and she was quite adamant that lily must never be allowed to bloom indoors. Funereal things, she said. I always thought it a little irrational. Indeed, one must make peace with one's flowers, I think. Now Miss Lovelace did. You notice anything unusual last night? Sounds, movements, perhaps footsteps? There was a pause. I did hear something, footsteps in the hall, very late. Past midnight, I thought it was Edward. I saw someone pass my door, but I didn't open it. One tries to avoid creating alarm. Very sensible, said Whimsy. And this figure did? It seemed familiar. Was it moving toward the conservatory? She hesitated. It could have been Lady Margaret. Or Mr. Halberton. He sometimes walks when he cannot sleep. Did he say as much to you? Yes. When he arrived yesterday, he mentioned that he had trouble adjusting from continental time. He meant the continent, of course. Whimsy's eyes twinkled faintly. Yes, so rarely does one mean breakfast by that phrase. Very good. Thank you, Miss Lovelace. You have been of great help. As they exited the room, Bunter murmured, Forgive me, my lord, but there was a trace of perfume in Miss Lovelace's chamber. Indeed, said Whimsy, adjusting his gloves, and not the usual delicate scent one associates with maidenly decline, but something bolder, jasmine, perhaps, or tuberose? Jasmine, I believe. Then we must add that to our growing list of inconsistencies, Bunter. Now, to Edward. The footman summoned from the scullery was a bland-faced young man, with over-polished shoes. and the anxious air of someone always being watched. He answered questions with the mechanical brevity of a soldier on drill. Lady Halberton rang her bell at 9:30, he said. Mrs. Platt attended her. After that she retired to her sitting room. Lights were out by 10. You are certain of that? I took the lamps, my lord, as I do every night. And you saw no one else afterward? No movement in the halls? No, my lord. I slept downstairs, didn't hear a thing. Where were you between 10 and midnight? In the pantry, reading. The Motorist's Companion. A noble text, said Wimsey. But tell me, did Lady Halberton ever request anything from the greenhouse? No, sir. She hated the place, wouldn't go near it, Wimsey nodded. Very good, Edward, that will be all. He waited until the footman had retreated, then turned to Bunter with a peculiar stillness. We now have 3 people swearing Lady Halberton never entered the conservatory voluntarily. Yet there she was prone, adorned, and notably not in bed. With the doors locked, no sign of intrusion, and no orchid. Bunter was silent a moment. Would you like to see the greenhouse now, my lord? Wimsey nodded. Yes, but with caution. I suspect it may contain more than begonias. The greenhouse, when they reached it, was unlocked, clean, and entirely unremarkable save for one detail. Amid the clay pots and watering cans, upon a low stone ledge near the back wall, sat a single orchid, pale, waxy, and quite fresh. It had been plucked and discarded, not arranged. There were 2 faint brownish smudges on the leaves mud, perhaps, or blood. Wimsey examined it silently, then drew a handkerchief from his pocket and wrapped the flower carefully. He said nothing for a full minute. Then, softly, the pearls were still in place. But the orchid that was the personal token. Someone wanted to preserve the scene as pristine, almost reverent, and yet they left this behind. Bunter looked thoughtful. An accident, my lord? No, said Wimsey. A message, only not to us, to her. He straightened and looked once more through the glass walls, where the shadows of the garden swayed gently in the wet breeze. She met someone here, Bunter. Not just someone she knew, but someone she trusted. And now she's dead. Let us speak to young Mr. Halberton next. I believe his alibi will prove unsatisfactory. Lord Peter Wimsey found young Mr. Halberton lounging in the library, a cavernous room lined with dusty tomes and the faint scent of old leather and atmosphere perfectly suited to conceal secrets beneath polite conversation. Basil Halberton, as he was christened, was a man of about 35, slender, with the air of someone who had spent more time abroad than in his native England, which was confirmed by his slightly affected accent, and an indefinable impatience with the house's sombre air. He looked up as Wimsey and Bunter entered. Ah, Lord Peter, I hear the family is in a state of shock. His smile was thin, almost rehearsed. A dreadful business. Indeed, said Wimsey, seating himself with the studied casualness of a man who intended to uncover everything without hurry. You arrived only yesterday, did you not? Basil nodded. Yes, direct from Paris. Quite the culture shock. I assure you. I had hoped to find a quiet refuge here, but it seems fate has other plans. Wimsey's gaze sharpened. I understand you have been struggling with continental time. Pray, do tell me more. Simply that I keep odd hours, Basil admitted. It is difficult to adjust. The sun rises and sets differently here, which disrupts one's rhythm. I often find myself awake when others sleep. He shrugged. I was out for a walk late last night, about midnight or so. Alone? Yes, the house was too oppressive. I find fresh air clears the mind. And did you see your mother? Basil's face stiffened, a flicker of something unreadable passing before his eyes. No, she was already in bed, I think. I did not disturb her. Did you pass through the conservatory on your walk? He shook his head. No, the conservatory is rather stuffy. I took the path by the east wing and around the gardens. Whimsy steepled his fingers, observing the young man's careful composure. And yet Miss Lovelace heard footsteps near her door just past midnight. Might you have been the figure she glimpsed? I cannot say, Basil replied coolly. I was walking alone. I do not keep to a schedule here. Did anyone see you last night? Basil smiled thinly. No, I prefer discretion. Unlike some, I do not rely on servants' gossip. Whimsy inclined his head. Very well. And the matter of your mother's affairs? Is there any tension? Inheritance disputes, debts, or other difficulties? Basil's eyes flashed. I am aware of no such troubles. My mother was prudent. Our family estate is secure. Yet I hear rumors that your tastes run to abstract paintings and, dare I say, unorthodox philosophies? Basil's mouth twitched. I enjoy art. If that is unorthodox, so be it. Indeed. Whimsy folded his hands. I shall leave you to your reflections, Mr. Halgerton. Your cooperation is appreciated. As they left, Bunter whispered, My Lord, he is a charming fellow, but there is something rehearsed in his manner. Yes, said Whimsy, like a man used to being watched, and disliking the audience. Their next inquiry was to the gardener, a taciturn man named Mr. Wilcox, who lived in the cottage adjacent to the estate. His alibi was straightforward. He was home all night, tending to the greenhouse heaters, he claimed, a necessity given the rare orchid collection Lady Halberton had once prided herself upon. Yet when Whimsy inquired about any disturbance or unusual visitors, Wilcox shrugged. Nothing out of the ordinary, sir. The lady's death is a mystery to us all. Yet the gardener's eyes lingered too long on the orchid wrapped in Whimsy's handkerchief, and the faintest twitch betrayed something unspoken. Later, as twilight deepened, Whimsy and Bunter returned to the conservatory to examine the scene once more. The lily stood still, white and fragrant, but there was an odd chill in the air, despite the late spring warmth outside. Whimsy's gaze lingered on the ornate clock over the mantelpiece, a heavy bronze affair that had stopped at precisely 12:13 a.m. He tapped the glass. A clock, Bunter, is often the most honest witness. It tells us the precise moment when time, so to speak, ceased for Lady Halberton. Bunter nodded. So the murder must have happened around then? Indeed. And yet the last confirmed sighting was 9:30. What transpired in those intervening hours? Whimsy examined the windows, noting the subtle difference in condensation on the glass panes. One window is ajar, he remarked. Curious, since all were supposedly locked. Bunter peered closely. That's the window nearest the greenhouse door. Exactly. Whimsy's tone sharpened. If someone had wished to enter or exit unobserved, that would be the logical point. And yet no footprints were found in the damp earth beneath. Unless, Bunter ventured, someone wiped them away. Whimsy smiled. The perfection of an alibi often depends upon such little details. Now the orchid. fresh but discarded. Its presence suggests a meeting, perhaps a gift or a farewell. He returned to the orchid, now wrapped with care, noting the slight bruising of the petals and the smudged leaves. This orchid was removed from her person post-mortem, Whimsy said thoughtfully, either by the murderer or by someone who wished to disguise the scene. A sudden knock interrupted their musings. It was Inspector Frimpton, bearing a file and a heavy frown. "My lord," he said, "we have spoken with the local vicar. He reports some peculiar behavior from Lady Halberton's nephew, a Mr. Julius Grant, who arrived unexpectedly last night." Whimsy raised an eyebrow. "Ah, another visitor. And how does Mr. Grant explain his presence?" "He claims to have come to offer condolences and assist with arrangements. But witnesses place him near the conservatory shortly before midnight." "Interesting," said Whimsy. "It seems the night was busier than we first thought." Bunter handed over a telegram found in Lady Halberton's sitting-room, addressed to her from an unknown sender, warning of consequences if the past is disturbed. "Cryptic," said Whimsy, "and intriguing." He considered the accumulating fragments: a locked house, footsteps in the night, an unexpected visitor, a mysterious telegram, and a single orchid discarded in the greenhouse. "There is a pattern here," Whimsy murmured, "a thread of past grievances woven into present tragedy." He paced the conservatory slowly. The pearls remained in place, not a trinket stolen. Yet the orchid was removed and discarded. The clock stopped at 12:13. Someone had access, someone with motive. But who? Asked Bunter. "The answer, dear Bunter, lies in the psychology of those involved. The respectable veneer of gravestones conceals resentments, rivalries, perhaps even secrets long buried." He tapped his cane thoughtfully. "We must next look beyond the obvious to the hidden lives and half-spoken words. Shall we begin?" "With Mr. Grant?" Bunter asked. "Indeed. It is time to rouse the sleeping past and see what it reveals." With that, Lord Peter Whimsy departed the conservatory, his mind already piecing together the delicate mosaic of deceit, waiting to reveal the quiet but deadly truth behind the still pearls and the fallen orchid. The drawing-room was a study in genteel bloom, the fading afternoon light casting long, juddering shadows through the heavy curtains. It was here that Lord Peter Whimsy awaited the arrival of Julius Grant, Lady Halberton's nephew, whose sudden appearance the previous night had stirred the otherwise dormant dust of greystones into brisk, uneasy motion. The butler, a sinewy man named Peabody, whose demeanor resembled that of a well-oiled machine forced to perform delicate human interactions, announced the visitor with a barely perceptible cough. Julius Grant entered with the practiced air of a man who has long been accustomed to the aristocratic circle, yet harbors some private impatience with its decorum. His face was angular, sharp-featured, and bore the faintest hint of a simmering discontent, an expression as if he found the setting not only stifling but mildly absurd. "Lord Peter," he began, offering a stiff bow that Whimsy returned with his customary arch smile. "I trust I do not intrude?" "On the contrary, Mr. Grant, your presence is, shall we say, timely." Whimsy gestured to a chair, inviting the younger man to sit. Grant sank into the chair, folding his long hands before him. "I fear the circumstances could hardly be less agreeable," he murmured. "My aunt's death was a shock. I was away abroad and only returned this morning." The night had settled into a quiet tension, the kind that clings to old walls, like damp fog in an unventilated crypt. Lord Peter Wimsey, accompanied by Bunter, made his way through the dim corridors of Greystones, the distant tick of the hall clock marking time with an almost oppressive regularity. The salver found in the drawing-room, now carefully bagged by Bunter, was a troubling fragment of the puzzle, a misplaced artifact, yet one that carried silent testimony to something unseen. Wimsey paused outside the study, the room where Lady Halberton had spent much of her last hours. The heavy oak door bore the faintest scratch marks near the handle, almost invisible to the casual observer, but sharply etched in Wimsey's mind as a potential sign of struggle, or perhaps of a hastily disguised entry. "Bunter," Wimsey murmured. "The uneven scratch here suggests someone tried to open this door with more haste than courtesy. Perhaps the butler?" Bunter suggested, glancing toward the direction of Peabody's quarters. "Too facile, I fear. Peabody is an exemplary servant, though not without his quirks. But we shall confirm all alibis in due course." With a quiet push, Wimsey entered the study. It was a sanctum of old-world order. Shelves of leather-bound volumes, a heavy mahogany desk strewn with scattered papers, and a faint, lingering scent of lavender and old tobacco smoke. The room's gloom was only broken by the soft glow of a single lamp. On the desk lay a letter, somewhat crumpled, the handwriting elegant but rushed. Wimsey picked it up, noting the words beneath the signature, a name that sent a ripple through his consciousness. E. Vane. "Evelyn Vane," Wimsey said softly, more to himself than to Bunter. "An old acquaintance of Lady Halberton, I understand." "Yes, my lord," Bunter confirmed. "She is said to have been a confidante in the days before the family estate was settled." Wimsey's fingers traced the paper. "This letter is a plea, or perhaps a warning. It speaks of matters best left untouched, of debts old and new, and hints at a reckoning that may come to pass, should certain truths be unearthed." Bunter frowned. It would seem that Lady Halberton's past was not the tame record her family portrayed. "On the contrary, the past rarely is," Wimsey said with a faint smile. "Let us visit Mrs. Vane, shall we? A woman who might illuminate the shadows cast by Lady Halberton's final days." The journey to Mrs. Vane's modest cottage in the village was undertaken with a deliberate economy of words, each step weighted with anticipation. Upon arrival, the door was opened by a slender woman of uncertain age, her eyes sharp beneath a veil of graying curls. "Lord Peter Wimsey, I presume," she said, her voice steady, but carrying an undercurrent of old wounds. "I had expected you sooner." Wimsey inclined his head. "And I, you. It seems our mutual acquaintance, Lady Halberton, left behind more than memories." Evelyn Vane allowed herself a brief smile, the tightness around her eyes softening momentarily. Indeed, she was a woman of formidable will, and of secrets that could unsettle even the sturdiest of foundations. "Secrets, you say?" Wimsey pressed gently. "Might I ask what nature these held?" Mrs. Vane's gaze flickered toward the window, as if measuring the safety of the conversation. "Years ago, before the estate was settled in its current form, there were disputes about money, property, and lineage. Some accusations were whispered and some written, but none spoke openly. Whispers can be deafening," Wimsey noted, "and such shadows often breed resentment." "Exactly so," Mrs. Vane said. "Lady Halberton sought to protect her." family's reputation at any cost. But some debts, emotional and financial, cannot be so easily buried. Wimsey stepped closer, his tone dropping to that intimate, disarming register he reserved for moments such as this. Do you know of anyone who might have wished her harm? Anyone with a grudge that ran deeper than mere familial friction? Mrs. Vane hesitated, then produced a small photograph. From a locket she wore a young woman with a striking resemblance to Lady Halberton, but with eyes colder, more defiant. Her sister Matilda, cast out long ago, but never forgotten by those who knew the truth. A sister hidden from the public eye? Wimsey mused. That would certainly complicate matters. Complicate is a mild term, Mrs. Vane whispered. Matilda was said to have been involved in scandal and elopement, accusations of impropriety. The family erased her, but some say she vowed vengeance. Revenge is a dangerous poison, Wimsey remarked. Have you heard from her recently? Mrs. Vane shook her head. No one has, but letters have been received threatening, cryptic. They arrived at the estate in recent weeks. Always unsigned. Wimsey nodded slowly, feeling the invisible threads pull tighter. This aligns with the letter found in the study, and the warnings Lady Halberton received. As they left Mrs. Vane's cottage, the detective's mind swirled with the implications. A hidden sister veiled threats, a family fractured beneath the veneer of respectability. It was the perfect breeding ground for tragedy. Returning to Greystones, Wimsey requested to see the household ledger and correspondence, hoping to uncover the origins of the anonymous missives. The housekeeper, Mrs. Dennison, was tasked with producing the letters, which Wimsey examined with meticulous care. The handwriting was varied, some notes scrawled in haste, others more measured. Common to them all was an insistence. Do not disturb what is buried. The past will rise. Among these was a curious detail, a faint scent of a particular cologne, one unfamiliar but faintly reminiscent of something floral, yet bitter, a subtle signature left by the writer. Curious, Wimsey murmured. A scented clue in the realm of words. Whoever these threats come from wishes their presence known, yet veiled. He turned to Bunter. We must consider those within the household who might possess knowledge of scents and secrets alike. The investigation next circled back to the servants, particularly Peabody, the butler, whose nervousness had been noted earlier. Wimsey found him polishing silver in the scullery, the polished sheen catching the lamplight with a harsh glare. Mr. Peabody, Wimsey began conversationally, I understand the estate has its quiet corners and whispered stories. The butler paused, his hand steady, but his eyes wary. Whispers travel faster than I care for, my lord. Indeed. And yet one must attend to all manner of noises. Tell me, have you noticed anything amiss? Visitors, strangers, or unusual deliveries? Peabody's gaze flickered away. There have been late-night callers, not all of whom the family cared to acknowledge. Late-night callers? Wimsey echoed. Names? I cannot say, my lord. I was instructed not to ask questions. Wimsey smiled thinly. A prudent man. Yet such silence can sometimes be more telling than speech. The butler nodded reluctantly. If I may, my lord, I believe some among the family have secrets better left alone. And yet here we are, seeking those very truths. Peabody's jaw tightened, and he resumed polishing with renewed vigor. Later, In the privacy of the library, Whimsy examined the house's master keyring, noting which doors were accessible to whom. The study, with its scratched door, was under lock and key, but several household members had possession of keys. Among them, notably, was Basil Halberton, the cousin whose estrangement with Julius Grant had been made clear, and who had been notably reticent during initial inquiries. Whimsy's thoughts returned to the clocks. The mismatch between the conservatory's stopped clock and the hall clock suggested deliberate tampering, a manipulation of time to confuse or deceive. He considered the layout. The conservatory lay at the far end of the house, near the gardens, and was often used for late-night smoking or private conversations. Was it possible the time discrepancies were engineered to establish a false alibi or mask an intrusion? These questions demanded further exploration. Before retiring for the night, Whimsy found himself once more drawn to the grand portrait of Lady Halberton. The pearls glistened dully, and the lamp-like immobile sentinels preserving a final, silent testimony. The case had deepened beyond a mere household quarrel. The past was alive, stirring beneath the quiet surface like an insidious tide, ready to engulf those unwise enough to disturb it. Tomorrow would bring more questions, and perhaps the first glimmers of answers. For now, however, the night held its breath, and so did Lord Peter Whimsy. The morning light filtered weakly through the heavy curtains of gray stones, casting long shadows that flickered like ghosts upon the worn Persian carpets. Lord Peter Whimsy was already up, his mind far from the warmth of the hearth. He had requested a full breakfast for the household senior staff, eager to resume his inquiries under more controlled conditions. There was an order to be imposed, a chronology to be verified, and it was among those who served that the truth often took its most subtle and revealing shape. The dining room, spacious and austere, was already half filled when Whimsy arrived. The clatter of spoons and murmured exchanges softened by the thick draperies. The housekeeper, Mrs. Dennison, sat stiffly at the far end, her expression taut with propriety, but shadowed by the strain of recent events. Peabody, the butler, was present as well, his usual reserve replaced by a more guarded vigilance. Several other servants, including the cook and 2 maids, took their places without enthusiasm, their eyes betraying unease. "Good morning," Whimsy began, his tone mild but incisive. "I trust your night passed without disturbance." A chorus of polite affirmations followed, but Whimsy noted the subtle inconsistencies in the responses, slight hesitations, and eyes darting away. The servants, like all human beings, could not help but betray their truth through small lapses. He chose his moment carefully. "Mrs. Dennison, if you please, might you recount the household's comings and goings last evening, particularly after dinner?" The housekeeper adjusted her lace cuffs and cleared her throat. "Certainly, my lord. After the family retired, most of the servants went to their quarters by 10 o'clock. The night watch was assigned as usual. Peabody oversaw the hall and main floor, while I checked the kitchens and upper corridors. And no unusual visitors or disturbances?" Whimsy's voice was deceptively casual. "None that I can recall," she said, though her fingers trembled ever so slightly around her teacup. "Mr. Peabody, might you add to this?" The butler nodded, but there was a tautness to his jaw. "I made my rounds as usual. The front doors were secured promptly. However, I did notice the study door was left ajar for a time uncharacteristic, given Lady Halberton's meticulous habits. "Ah, the door," Whimsy murmured. "An intriguing detail. Was it still ajar when you last passed?" "No, my lord. I closed it before retiring, but it was certainly open earlier in the evening." "Thank you, Peabody. That will do for now." Whimsy's gaze swept the room, settling on a young maid, Clara, who had thus far remained silent. There was something about her, a fleeting anxiety, or perhaps a hidden knowledge that piqued his interest. "Miss Clara," Whimsy said softly, "you have been with the household long?" "2 years, my lord," she replied, voice barely above a whisper. "Have you observed anything unusual these past weeks? Anything you might have thought insignificant at the time?" Clara hesitated, then, encouraged by Whimsy's calm demeanor, spoke with careful precision. "There have been late-night conversations, sir. Whispers from the drawing-room when the family believed the servants asleep." "Whispers on what matters?" "Difficult to say, my lord. But I heard mention of debts, old grievances, and something about a visitor who was not welcome." Whimsy's eyebrows rose imperceptibly. "A visitor? Unknown to the household?" Clara nodded. "Yes, and I believe this visitor came to threaten Lady Halberton." "Threaten? Did you recognize the voice?" "No, sir. It was always in the shadows." Whimsy's lips curved into a faint smile. "Excellent. Shadows, debts, and threats, the familiar triumvirate of our tale." He thanked Clara and turned to Bunter, who had been quietly taking notes. "The notion of late-night visitors aligns with what Peabody mentioned. We must discover who had motive and opportunity to enter undetected." The next logical step was to review the household keys and investigate the locks themselves. Whimsy requested the master key-ring, and with Bunter's assistance, they examined the mechanical workings of the study door lock and those of adjacent rooms. The locks were complex, custom-made for the estate, designed to ensure privacy and security. Yet the scratches near the study door handle suggested an unskilled attempt to open it without a key. Whimsy found this curious. If the visitor was clandestine, why risk such a crude intrusion when a key might be obtained more subtly? A review of the keyholders revealed a narrow list: Basil Halberton, the family's estranged cousin; Peabody, the butler; Mrs. Dennison, the housekeeper; and Julius Grant himself. Whimsy's mind returned to Basil. His reluctance during questioning, combined with his easy access, made him a person of interest. But what of his movements during the crucial evening hours? Bunter reported that Basil had been seen at the local inn until late, in the company of a known gambler, a Mr. Langdon, whose temper and debts were matters of local record. It was an alibi that required scrutiny. The detective next focused on the peculiar matter of the clocks. The hall clock, ticking steadily in the central corridor, was juxtaposed with the conservatory clock, stopped at precisely 9:15 p.m. That time marked the moment of the disturbance, or so it was believed. Yet the conservatory was distant, and for the clock there to stop exactly at that moment, one could imagine the deliberate intervention of a saboteur. Whimsy speculated aloud. If one were to alter the time on a clock, it might be to suggest an event occurred earlier or later than it truly did. Bunter nodded. A clever device for masking an alibi. The possibility demanded verification. Whimsy arranged to have the clocks examined by the local horologist to confirm tampering. While waiting for the report, Whimsy requested to review the correspondence once more, with a particular focus on handwriting analysis. The letters were revealing more of their nature under this new lens. A pattern emerged. The threatening notes, though unsigned, shared a peculiar flourish at the end of several lines, a loop resembling a backwards letter E. Whimsy mused. A signature disguised. Within threats. The writer wishes to conceal identity, yet leave a calling card. He requested samples of handwriting from all possible suspects, including Basil Halberton, Julius Grant, and Mrs. Dennison. Meanwhile, Mrs. Dennison's composure cracked when pressed gently about the anonymous letters. It transpired that she had indeed found one tucked inside a book returned to the library, but had been instructed by Lady Halberton to destroy it, a request she fulfilled only partially. This partial preservation proved a fortunate oversight. Further, examination of the letter revealed faint traces of the same floral bitter, cologne scent noted before. The plot thickened with the arrival of the horologist's report. It confirmed Whimsy's suspicions. The conservatory clock's mechanism had been deliberately stopped and reset to 9:15 p.m., but the hall clock remained unaltered. The implication, Whimsy said quietly, is that the timing of the event was manipulated to create confusion. Someone wanted us to believe the disturbance occurred at the conservatory precisely at that hour, when in truth it was later. Bunter tapped a pen thoughtfully. And since the hall clock was unaltered, it remains our reliable reference. Precisely. Which leads us to reconsider all alibis framed around that false time stop. Whimsy paced, considering the possibilities. If the true time of the disturbance was later, then those previously accounted for elsewhere might have had the opportunity to commit the crime. Among these, Basil's reported presence at the inn until late was called into question by a new witness. The innkeeper, a Mrs. Clemens who admitted she had seen Basil leave before 9:30 p.m., alone and in a mood far from convivial. This retraction of Basil's alibi sharpened the focus, but Whimsy was not yet ready to accuse. He was, instead, assembling pieces of a meticulous mosaic. A visit to the local vicarage provided an unexpected insight. Reverend Albright, a man as discreet as he was learned, remarked on the nature of the Halberton family's internal divisions. The sins of the fathers, Lord Peter often echoed down the generations, he mused. But it is seldom the sins themselves that destroy families. More often it is the concealment and denial that breeds bitterness. Whimsy allowed himself a wry smile. Wise words, Reverend, and fitting for a household that appears, at first glance, to be the very picture of genteel harmony. Appearances are a fragile veneer, the clergyman added, one that cracks beneath pressure. Returning to Greystones, Whimsy's thoughts turned to the enigmatic Matilda, the cast-out sister, whose absence loomed like a shadow over every revelation. If Matilda had truly returned, or if her presence was being impersonated, then the stakes were raised considerably. WIMSE. Y decided it was time to confront Julius Grant with the inconsistencies in his statements and the new evidence regarding the timing. Julius met Whimsy in the library, his face pale but mask firm. "My lord," he began, "I assure you I had no quarrel with Lady Halberton. Our disputes were business matters, frustrating but not lethal." "Business is often a mask for deeper feelings," Whimsy said. Your whereabouts last evening? And can you confirm the exact times of your movements?" Julius hesitated, then recited his timeline, which, when measured against the corrected clock data and witness statements, revealed troubling gaps and contradictions. Whimsy's gaze sharpened. "Mr. Grant, truth is the one thing that ultimately brings peace. I trust you will assist me in resolving these discrepancies." The conversation lingered in the air like an electric charge, and Julius's resolve seemed to waver ever so slightly. The puzzle was closing in on a nexus: secret visits, altered times, concealed resentments, and a family fractured by old wounds, each detail a step closer to an uncomfortable truth. As the evening settled once more over Greystones, Whimsy allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The pearls, still in place on Lady Halberton's neck in her portrait, were a testament to appearances maintained to the last. Yet beneath the surface, the currents of human frailty and cunning were rising. And Lord Peter Wimsey, with his habitual combination of scholarly wit and unyielding logic, was poised to navigate them to their source. The candlelight flickered faintly against the ornate wallpaper of the drawing-room, lending an uneasy pallor to the familiar contours of Greystone's interior. Lord Peter Wimsey, seated comfortably in his favorite leather chair, glanced casually toward the door, where Bunter stood ready with notes meticulously recorded and cross-referenced. The evening had been one of measured patience and careful questioning, each response teasing apart the web of half-truths and deliberate silences that cloaked the household. Whimsy's eyes settled once again on the study door, that silent sentinel to secrets half-concealed and half-forgotten. The lock was now understood to be a stage prop in this tragic drama scratched by an unskilled hand, yet ultimately closed and locked by someone with legitimate access. The implications were clear. The visitor was someone inside the household's circle, or at least someone privy to its more intimate rhythms. "Bunter," Whimsy said, "the detail of the door left ajar troubles me. Peabody reported it, yes?" "Indeed, my lord. It was open when he passed by shortly before 10, but secured thereafter. The discrepancy of timing is critical." "Precisely. If the disturbance occurred after 10, which our clock investigations increasingly suggest, then the opening of the door earlier is a deliberate misdirection." Bunter nodded. "Our suspect had to ensure that the door's condition did not betray their presence after that hour." "Exactly so. Now consider the letters," Whimsy mused, glancing at the collection laid out on the table. "The peculiar flourish at the end, almost a signature hidden in plain sight. An arrogant little clue left by a writer confident in their anonymity." "It may be Basil Halberton," Bunter ventured, "given his demonstrated temperament and access." "Perhaps. Yet Basil's recent change in alibi undermines our certainty. He claims to have left the inn earlier than first stated. We must verify the credibility of Mrs. Clemens's testimony." The clock struck 9, a sonorous chime that filled the room with its deep resonance. Whimsy allowed a rare smile. "Time, dear Bunter, is our relentless accomplice and adversary. Just then the door opened quietly, admitting Julius Grant, the estate's lawyer, and a man whose pallid countenance bespoke more than the usual worry. Whimsy gestured to a chair. "Mr. Grant, I trust you understand the delicacy of our discourse." "Lord Peter, I confess I am at my wit's end." The family's fractures seemed to widen with each question. Indeed, but clarity emerges only from the fractures. We seek the hidden pattern behind this discord. Julius sank into the chair, the weight of unspoken truths pressing down on his shoulders. "I must confess," he said after a pause, "there are details I have withheld out. I've a misguided sense of loyalty." Whimsy leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Your discretion is noted, but loyalty must not come at the expense of justice." Julius's eyes flickered with something between shame and resolve. "Very well. There was a meeting at Greystones, unrecorded in any official ledger, just days before the incident." Whimsy's interest sharpened. "A meeting? Between whom?" "Between Lady Halberton, Basil Halberton, and a stranger one, not known to the household. A man named Edgar Marlborough, a solicitor with a reputation for discretion and an involvement in rather unsavory business dealings." "Edgar Marlborough," Whimsy repeated, the name striking a faint chord. "A man with debt and certainly capable of threats if driven to desperation." "Exactly. It was discussed that Lady Halberton intended to contest certain clauses. In her late husband's will, Marlborough had been engaged as an intermediary, but tensions ran high." "Thank you, Mr. Grant. This is a significant development." Whimsy dismissed Julius with a nod and turned to Bunter. "We must locate this Edgar Marlborough. His presence could shift the entire balance." As the night deepened, Whimsy's thoughts returned to Matilda, the absent sister whose spectre haunted the household. If Edgar Marlborough was involved in legal maneuvers around inheritance, could Matilda's return be more than a ghost story? Could someone be impersonating her for gain? The following morning saw Whimsy and Bunter visiting the local solicitor's offices, an austere establishment where Marlborough was known but not warmly regarded. His reputation was that of a man entangled in debts and questionable clients, a figure slipping ever closer to the margins of respectability. Whimsy requested an interview, and the receptionist, guarded at first, eventually allowed a brief meeting. Marlborough appeared as Whimsy had imagined, thin, nervous, with darting eyes that refused to meet direct scrutiny. "I understand you have business with Greystones," Whimsy began, his voice smooth but firm. Marlborough swallowed nervously. "Merely professional. Nothing more. But the late Lady Halberton had reservations about the will?" Whimsy pressed. "Indeed. She sought changes, but legalities are cumbersome, and the family fractious. Fractious indeed. Might I ask, where were you on the night of the 14th? Marlborough's eyes flickered, a faint tremor betraying his composure. "At home, I assure you." Whimsy smiled thinly. "Alone, I gather?" The solicitor paled. "Yes." "Alone in a house with no witnesses? How convenient." The interview ended abruptly with Marlborough's curt excuse and a nervous glance toward the door. Back at Greystones, Whimsy's attention turned again to the psychological undercurrents. The late-night whispers Clara had overheard, the debts, the grudges, the hidden visitor, each a strand in a web not of occult mystery, but of very human machinations. Whimsy requested another audience with the household staff, focusing this time on the minor details, habits, noises, forgotten words. The cook, a robust woman named Mrs. Gillingham, provided an unanticipated clue. She mentioned a discarded shawl found near the conservatory, dark blue, with a peculiar silver clasp engraved, with a family crest not belonging to the Halbertons. Whose might it be? Whimsy mused aloud. Mrs. Dennison looked startled. It might belong to Lady Matilda's husband. Lady Matilda's husband? Whimsy raised an eyebrow. Yes, my lord. A man estranged from the family, known to be volatile. This revelation opened a new avenue. If Matilda's husband was indeed present, or had been recently, his involvement could explain the intimidation and chaos. But why disguise his presence? And why leave such an identifying token behind? These questions gnawed at Whimsy's mind. His next visit was to the stables, where the groom reported having seen a man fitting Matilda's husband's description lurking near the grounds late one evening. About 10:30, the groom recalled. I thought him out for a walk, but the man looked agitated. Alone? Whimsy asked. Double quotes, yes, my lord. Alone? The timeline, now refined by these testimonies, suggested that the disturbance at Greystones happened later than originally believed, contradicting the misleading clock at the conservatory. A pattern was emerging of deliberate misdirection of shadows cast to confuse the honest light of truth. Whimsy summoned Basil Halberton once more, confronting him gently but firmly. With these new developments, Basil's defenses began to crumble, his bravado fading beneath the weight of detailed inconsistencies and the knowledge of witnesses placing others on the estate at critical times. Yet even as Whimsy felt the threads tightening, the final puzzle, peace remained elusive. There was still the matter of the missing salver, the one Peabody had reported absent from the sideboard the morning after the incident. Its disappearance, previously dismissed as trivial, now took on a sinister significance. Could it have been used to smuggle messages, conceal objects, or serve as a token in some psychological game? Whimsy requested Peabody to recall every detail about the salver's removal. The butler remembered seeing it last during afternoon tea, before the household dispersed for the evening. No one was seen carrying it away, and yet by morning it had vanished without trace. An inside job, then, Whimsy concluded, or a misdirection to suggest internal strife. As dusk fell once again on Greystones, Whimsy stood in the hall, his sharp eyes catching the faintest glimmer of a pearl earring lying in the shadows near the staircase, a small, gleaming reminder that the victim's legacy lingered in the very air of the house. The game was far from over, but the players were slowly revealing themselves. The stage was set for the next act, and Lord Peter Whimsy was ready to call it. Lord Peter Whimsy lingered near the grand staircase, the pearl earrings, faint shimmer still echoing in his mind as a symbol both poignant and puzzling. Its presence in the dim hallway, far from where Lady Halberton's body was found, was a curious anomaly, not lost in the chaos of her final moments, but deliberately placed or carelessly dropped in a moment of distraction. Either way, it was a clue waiting for its rightful context. The household was in its usual state of controlled agitation, servants moving with measured purpose, but wide eyes betraying their unease. Each glance cast at Whimsy seemed to carry a silent question, a hope for resolution mingled with fear of further revelations. He had come to appreciate the British country house as an ecosystem of subtle tensions, where loyalties were often more brittle than crystal, and secrets hid in plain sight, like the faded tapestries lining the walls. Whimsy's mind returned to the missing salver. It was not merely a piece of silverware, but a symbol and object of routine and ceremony gone absent without trace. He had pondered its significance during the night, wondering if it might serve as a container for more than just tea and biscuits. Could it have concealed a message? Or perhaps more chillingly, the means by which the fatal deed was enacted or covered up? He requested an audience with Peabody again, the butler's countenance worn by the strain of suspicion and prolonged inquiry. The man was impeccably professional, but visibly fatigued by the ordeal. "Peabody, if I may," Whimsy began with his usual soft insistence, "recount once more the movements concerning the salver on the day in question. Every detail, however minute, is of consequence." Peabody nodded, clearing his throat with the air of a man dutifully recounting the liturgy of a sacred ritual. It was laid out as usual for afternoon tea in the drawing-room, my lord, around 4:30. The mistress used it to serve the guests. After tea, it was removed by myself to the sideboard in the adjoining room. I saw it there at approximately 5 o'clock when I passed through on my way to the pantry. And after that, no one else was in the room, my lord. I did not see it moved again. The room was locked shortly thereafter, until the evening. Locked? Whimsy raised an eyebrow. Yes, as per custom, to prevent servants and children from disturbing the order. The study and drawing-room were to be left undisturbed until supper. The butler's precision was impeccable. Yet the disappearance of the salver during such a guarded interval was an enigma. If the room was locked and no unauthorized entry occurred, the conclusion was stark. The salver was taken by someone with a key and intimate knowledge of the household's routine. The next logical step was to verify the whereabouts of the keys. Whimsy requested the master key from Julius Grant, who produced a small, heavy keyring with several finely wrought keys. "I would like to see who had access to these on the evening of the 14th, Whimsy said. Julius looked uncomfortable. The household staff each have designated keys, of course, but the master key is kept in my office, Mr. Whimsy. Only I and Mr. Halberton have regular access. Has anyone else ever used it?" Whimsy's gaze was sharp. "On rare occasions for maintenance or emergencies, but such usage is recorded." Whimsy asked to see the ledger. The records confirmed the expected access. Only Julius Grant and Basil Halberton on that evening. And yet the salver vanished during a locked interval, Whimsy murmured. "Something does not add up." "Precisely," said Bunter, stepping forward. "If the salver was removed without raising suspicion, then the removal was either very brief or expertly concealed." "Or both," Whimsy agreed. "We should inquire into any recent deliveries or visits, no matter how trivial." The post had arrived as usual, and a delivery from a local florist was noted, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. However, the mention of Lady Halberton's contested will had prompted Whimsy to consider the possibility of an overlooked visitor. He sent Bunter to discreetly question the florist and the postman, seeking any visitors who might have arrived unexpectedly, or requested anonymity. Meanwhile, Whimsy's thoughts circled back to Edgar Marlborough. The solicitor's nervousness suggested guilt, yet he had produced an alibi, tenuous though it was. "Bunter," Whimsy said, "we must delve deeper into Marlborough's connections. Who are his associates? Are there any who might have interest in the Halberton estate?" The reply came promptly. Marlborough had indeed been seen in the company of a certain Frederick Ames, a man with a shadowy reputation for debt collection and coercion. This lead was troubling. Could Ames have been the unknown visitor? Had he been the presence behind the locked door manipulating the household's fragile peace? Whimsy arranged to meet Ames under the guise of a casual inquiry at a local tavern. The man was broad-shouldered, with a gaze that flickered between hostility and calculation. "Frederick Ames," Whimsy began smoothly, "I hear you have some business in the vicinity of Greystones?" Ames grunted. "Business is business. What's it to you?" "I'm merely curious about the dealings of Mr. Marlborough. It seems he's been less than forthcoming about his associations." Ames snorted. "Marlborough's a coward. I do thee. Talking when things get rough." "And what about the night of the 14th? Ames shifted uneasily. "I was nowhere near Greystones." "Yet witnesses place a man matching your description near the estate grounds late that evening." A tense silence followed. "Look, I was there," Ames admitted reluctantly. "But I didn't harm anyone. Just came to collect a debt." "Whose?" "Debt?" Whimsy pressed. "Lady Halberton's. She owed a fair sum, but she's a hard woman to deal with." "Did you have an agreement to meet her that night?" "No formal meeting, but I was to remind her of her obligations." Whimsy's mind raced. If Ames's presence was confirmed, the locked door was less an anomaly and more a deliberate attempt to conceal a clandestine meeting. Returning to Greystones, Whimsy convened the household in the drawing-room. The atmosphere was thick with expectation. He recounted the emerging picture: Marlborough's legal machinations, Ames's debt collection visit, the locked rooms, and the missing salver. He noted, with dry irony, "It appears our esteemed household is a veritable stage for intrigue complete, with reluctant players and obscure scripts." Whimsy then turned to Basil Halberton, whose impudence was now tinged with nervousness. "Mr. Halberton, your insistence on control over the household keys is understandable, yet this incident shows that control was insufficient." Basil flushed. "I've done nothing wrong." "Indeed, but your attempts to tighten the screws may have bred resentment. The servants' testimonies suggest tensions were at a boiling point." Whimsy's gaze swept the room. "Lady Halberton's tragedy seems rooted not merely in financial disputes, but in the darker motives of fear and desperation. The pearl earring, the missing salver, the conflicting timelines all pointed to a plan conceived with cunning and executed with cold calculation. Yet one piece still eluded comprehension: the method by which the murder was carried out, and how the killer managed to escape detection within the tightly controlled environment. The faint echo of a clock chiming midnight reverberated through the hall, marking time's inexorable march toward revelation. Whimsy's lips curved in a faint smile. The final act was near, and the truth would be illuminated by the cold, clear light of logic. The stage was set, the players in position. Now it was time for Lord Peter Whimsy to weave the threads into a tapestry of justice. The morning light, diffused through heavy curtains, fell upon the drawing-room with a reluctant softness, as if even the sun hesitated to intrude upon the sombre atmosphere at Greystones. Lord Peter Whimsy sat quietly near the bay window, a half-empty pipe resting forgotten in the ashtray, his gaze drifting over the meticulously arranged furniture, the thick carpets, and the pale faces of those gathered at various points in the room. The household had been roused early under the auspices of his request, and the usual order of things now felt unsettled, as if the house itself waited, breath held, for the final act to unfold. Whimsy's mind was far from idle. The details of the case spun through his thoughts in a careful, inexorable weave, each thread critical, none superfluous. The missing salver, the pearl earring discovered far from the scene of death, the locked drawing-room, the shadowed visit of Frederick Ames, and the secret were buried beneath layers of family resentment and legal maneuvering. The devil, as ever, was in the details. Julius Grant stood discreetly at the edge of the room, his face a study in controlled anxiety. He had been the quiet guardian of the household's daily rhythms for years, but the disturbance had chipped away at his usual imperturbability. Beside him, Bunter maintained his customary respectful silence, awaiting his lord's next move. Whimsy's voice broke the stillness, low and measured. "I have asked you all here to resolve the final mysteries that cling like cobwebs to this unfortunate affair. Before we proceed, I would ask each of you to reflect, in absolute honesty, on any unusual occurrences or observations, however trivial they may seem, between the hours of 4 and 7 on the evening of the 14th. A faint murmur rippled through the gathering. The assembled faces, though composed, betrayed the quiet stirrings of unease. Lady Mary Halberton, her expression inscrutable behind a veil of mourning, stepped forward. "There is nothing unusual I can recall, Lord Peter. The evening passed as any other, save for the dreadful news we now bear." Her voice was steady, yet Whimsy noted a flicker in her eyes that suggested concealment rather than forgetfulness. "Miss Halberton," Whimsy inclined his head, "your attentiveness to the household's details is well known. Might I venture to ask about the whereabouts of your mother's pearl earrings during the last evening?" Mary's brow furrowed momentarily. "They were with her, as always. I cannot imagine otherwise. But the pearl earring found near the corridor?" Whimsy countered gently. "Could it not have been dislodged in haste?" The lady's composure tightened. "It was my mother's favorite set. I would have noticed if one was missing." Whimsy allowed the silence to settle before turning to the butler. "Peabody, I understand the drawing-room was locked after tea. Is there any chance the lock was tampered with?" Peabody's eyes were steady. "My lord, I took every precaution. The lock was tested and found secure at the time. Yet the salver vanished," Whimsy mused aloud, "and the drawing-room remained locked until supper. A paradox, no?" Julius spoke up hesitantly. "There is one matter I have not mentioned before. A slight irregularity in the household clock, which chimed erratically that evening." Whimsy's interest sharpened. "Do elaborate." "The grandfather clock in the hall," Julius explained, "struck 13 times instead of the usual 12 at precisely 6 o'clock. I attributed it to a fault in the mechanism, but now I wonder if it might have masked other sounds." A smile touched Whimsy's lips, dry, ironic, and triumphant. "Precisely the kind of triviality that often holds the key to the greater mystery." He turned to Bunter. "Pray have the clock examined by a competent horologist. If its irregularity was exploited to disguise a critical moment, we must know." Bunter nodded and made discreet arrangements. Whimsy then moved to a seat, gesturing for the others to gather around. "The puzzle before us is one of timing and psychology. The locked room, the vanished salver, and the misplaced earring suggest not only premeditation, but also a misdirection intended to confuse and delay discovery." He paused, observing the reactions. "Frederick Ames's presence confirms a confrontation of sorts." but his claim of mere debt collection lacks the subtlety required for murder. The true perpetrator must have anticipated these movements and used them as cover. Lady Mary shifted uncomfortably. You imply someone close to us orchestrated this? Indeed. Murder, like a well-constructed novel, demands the villain be familiar with the setting and its inhabitants. The question is, who among us had the opportunity and motive to deceive so thoroughly? The silence that followed was heavy, punctuated only by the faint ticking of the restored clocks. Wimsey's thoughts turned again to Edgar Marlborough. The solicitor's nervousness and evasions had not escaped his notice. A man bound by legal obligations, yet tempted by avarice or desperation, was a dangerous figure. Miss Halberton, Wimsey addressed her once more. Did you notice any peculiarities in Mr. Marlborough's behavior recently? Mary hesitated, then confessed. He was increasingly insistent about the will's terms. I suspected he sought to influence my father, but I could not prove it. Wimsey nodded. Influence can take many forms: gentle persuasion, threats, even blackmail. He then turned to the assembled household. I must ask, has anyone here seen the solicitor in the drawing-room after tea on the 14th? No one responded. The silence was telling. Wimsey's gaze sharpened. It is in that hour, I believe, that the fatal act occurred, cleverly concealed by the errant chimes of the clock and the apparent sanctity of locked doors. The pieces began to fall into place. The pearl earring, displaced not accidentally, but during a struggle, the salver removed to serve as a vessel for something hidden or to distract from the true means of murder, and the clock, whose unusual chime masked the crucial moment. Bunter interrupted softly. Lord Peter, the horologist, has examined the clock. The fault is mechanical, but could have been triggered intentionally. Ah, a mechanism within a mechanism, Wimsey mused. Just the sort of detail that delights the criminal mind. He rose, pacing slowly as the weight of deduction settled. The final act requires a demonstration. We shall recreate the scene in the drawing-room. I will ask everyone to observe closely. As the afternoon wore on, Wimsey orchestrated a meticulous reenactment. With servants and family alike positioned, he demonstrated the sequence, the timing of footsteps, the handling of the salver, the exact moment the clock's errant chime would drown out any other sound. He paused before Lady Mary, who met his gaze without flinching. The murderer counted on this confusion. Yet it was a mistake to believe the clock's fault would be overlooked. His voice lowered, and that mistake will prove their undoing. The group dispersed after the demonstration, whispers rife with speculation. Wimsey remained, examining the drawing-room once more, his fingers tracing the edge of the missing salver's usual resting place. In his mind, the final revelation was a few steps away, just beyond the veil of polite society and calculated deceit. The house settled into a tense quiet, shadows lengthening as dusk approached. Yet beneath the surface the pulse of truth quickened. Awaiting release, Lord Peter Wimsey, with a wry glance and a pipe relict, was poised for the unmasking that would bring justice to Greystones, and a grim satisfaction to his own indefatigable intellect. The fire in the drawing-room's hearth flickered uncertainly as the evening shadows deepened, casting elongated shapes upon the richly appointed walls. Lord Peter Wimsey remained seated, his fingers lightly drumming the arm of his chair while his keen eyes roamed over the assembled company. The household of gray stones had been summoned once more, this time not under the auspices of polite inquiry, but with the unmistakable gravity of finality. No one spoke at first. The tension hung like a finely spun spider's web, delicate yet inescapable. Outside, a distant owl called mournfully, its solitary cry underscoring the somber mood. Whimsy's gaze fixed on Lady Mary Halberton, who met it with a composure that, while admirable, could not fully mask the flicker of unease beneath her dignified facade. "My friends," Whimsy began, his voice smooth and deliberate, "we have come, I believe, to the closing chapter of this unfortunate affair. The complexities of human nature rarely yield their secrets readily, but the truth, much like a fine Latin phrase, must be parsed with care and patience." He allowed the moment to settle, then continued, "We have observed the clock's errant chime, the missing salver, and the misplaced pearl earring. We have considered the motives and opportunities of all present. Now the subtle threads of deception will be unraveled." Whimsy stood and approached the hearth, drawing from his pocket a small notebook, its pages filled with meticulous notes. "Let us first revisit the timeline with absolute precision." He cleared his throat. "At 5 o'clock, Lady Halberton dined with her mother, as confirmed by the housekeeper. Shortly thereafter, the solicitor, Mr. Marlborough, was seen entering the library for a brief consultation with Sir Reginald. The drawing-room remained locked and undisturbed until supper. His gaze swept the room. Yet within this interval the fatal act was committed. The discrepancy lies in the soundscape of that hour, the irregular clock chiming 13 times at 6, a peculiarity that provided a smoke-screen for other noises. Whimsy's fingers tapped lightly on the armrest. Now the salver, which should have rested upon the sideboard, was missing when the body was discovered. It is not merely a vessel for afternoon tea, but a crucial piece of this puzzle. He turned to Julius Grant, who had been listening attentively. "You mentioned hearing no unusual sounds, no struggle or raised voices?" "Only the usual household noises, my lord," Julius replied. "But in truth, the chiming clock may well have drowned out anything unusual." "Precisely," Whimsy nodded. "The murderer relied on this cover. But what, pray, was the salver's purpose?" The room was silent save for the ticking of the other clocks. Lady Mary's eyes flicked toward the fireplace. "Lord Peter," she ventured, "could it have been removed to conceal evidence, perhaps to carry something from the room?" Whimsy smiled thinly. "Indeed, Miss Halberton. But what? The weapon was not a gun nor a knife. No wounds were found on the body. Instead, the victim's complexion and the position of his body suggest a subtler cause." His voice dropped to a near whisper. "Poison." Gasps were stifled behind hands and widened eyes. "Ah, but not the obvious kind," Whimsy continued, "for no traces were found in the usual suspects, food, wine, or personal effects. The salver, however, might have borne the means of administration." He motioned to Bunter. "Bring the evidence collected from the drawing-room." Bunter produced a small velvet-lined case, which Whimsy opened carefully. Inside lay a delicate crystal vial, now empty but faintly stained with a dark residue. "A tincture of belladonna, I suspect," Whimsy said thoughtfully. "Deadly in minute quantities, quick in effect, and utterly untraceable to the untrained eye. Lady Mary gasped again. Who could have known to use such a poison? Whimsy's eyes glinted. Someone learned, perhaps, or someone desperate. Let us return to our friend, Mr. Marlborough. He turned sharply to the solicitor, who shifted uneasily in his chair. You told us of your financial difficulties, Mr. Marlborough. Is it not true that your client, Sir Reginald, intended to revise his will in a manner unfavorable to you? Marlborough's face paled. I confess the new will was a blow. But murder is not the answer, nor is it always the act of cold calculation, Whimsy mused. Sometimes it is passion disguised as logic. He resumed his seat. The final clue lies in the pearl earring, found in the corridor, yes, but not from the victim's possession. The victim did not wear earrings. The eyes in the room turned toward Lady Mary. Is it not so, Miss Halberton? Whimsy asked gently. Mary's lips tightened. I confess I noticed the pearl missing from my mother's set after the tragedy. It must have come loose during a struggle. Whimsy inclined his head. Precisely. A struggle caused not by the victim, but by the assailant's haste. The murderer was startled, and the pearl fell as evidence. He paused, letting the implication sink in. Moreover, the act of locking the drawing-room was a calculated gesture, designed to suggest an impossible crime, a locked-room mystery, to baffle all but the most astute observer. Whimsy's voice grew firmer. But such tricks unravel before a keen mind. The lock, though seemingly secure, had been manipulated. A simple spring catch, unnoticed by the household, but easily accessed by one accustomed to the house. He fixed the room with a steady gaze. Who among you possesses the intimate knowledge necessary to exploit such a device? Julius Grant swallowed hard but remained silent. Whimsy continued. The culprit is not the hot-tempered nephew, nor the grieving widow, nor the suspicious solicitor alone. It is a conspiracy of convenience, yet one person is at its heart. He stood slowly. Consider the motive. Financial desperation compounded by resentment and the fear of exposure. Turning once again to Lady Mary, he said, Miss Halberton, your recent secret meetings with Mr. Marlborough were not merely to discuss the will, but to coerce your father into compliance. Mary's face blanched. I did what I must to preserve our family's fortune. Whimsy's eyes narrowed slightly, his tone devoid of malice, but edged with irony. And when persuasion failed, the tincture of belladonna proved a more persuasive advocate. She looked away, the facade crumbling. I never meant for him to suffer, only to incapacitate, to make him amend the will. But poison is an absolute arbiter, Miss Halberton, Whimsy replied. Your father's death was swift and final. The room held its breath. Suddenly Julius Grant broke the silence. But Lady Mary, the locked door. If you were to administer the poison, how did you exit unseen? Whimsy smiled thinly. Ah, the lock's secret. The spring catch known only to the household's closest members. Miss Halberton, you had the means and opportunity. The errant clock chimed your alibi, and the missing salver was your instrument of concealment. He turned to Bunter. Bring the salver. Bunter produced it, and Whimsy displayed a tiny scratch along its underside, an abrasion consistent with a small hidden compartment, recently tampered with. Inside this concealed recess was a vial, slipped away after the deed. Lady Mary's composure shattered. I thought no one knew. Whimsy's tone was gentle, almost pitying. The devil's finest trick is to believe one is alone in their secret. She sank into a chair, trembling. Whimsy addressed the room. Once more. Justice, though sometimes delayed, finds its mark. This tragedy, born of human frailty and avarice, reminds us that even the most artful deception fails before the light of reason. As the constable stepped forward to take Lady Mary into custody, Whimsy lit his pipe with deliberate care, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He turned to Bunter. "Let us leave this house of shadows behind." The pearls were indeed still in place, but not where they belonged. Outside, the night air was crisp and untroubled, a stark contrast to the quiet storm that had passed within Greystone's walls. Lord Peter Whimsy, ever the enigma, took a last thoughtful draw on his pipe and mused aloud. A fitting end, and yet one wonders if even the cleverest among us can ever truly escape the chains of family and fortune. With that, he departed into the night, leaving behind a household forever changed and a mystery neatly resolved. The drawing-room was dim, lit only by the flickering firelight that cast tall, capering shadows upon the walls. Lord Peter Whimsy stood by the mantelpiece, his expression a study in mild amusement, the faintest trace of a sardonic smile playing about his lips. Around him the assembled guests, Mrs. Langley, the perturbed housekeeper, Mr. Grantham, the heir, and Inspector Dawlish, whose face bore the habitual mix of exasperation and grudging admiration, waited in tense silence. "I trust," Whimsy began, "that you have all been suitably entertained by this evening's perplexities. It is a peculiar pleasure to watch a well-ordered household unravel so exquisitely, and all over a little set of pearls, no less." He paused, tapping the pearl pendant dangling from his lapel, a token once worn by the late Mrs. Harrington herself. "I should like to recount, then, the curious series of events that led us here." He turned slightly toward Mr. Grantham. "You will recall, of course, that the pearls were found undisturbed, precisely where Mrs. Harrington herself had last placed them, and yet we had a theft of the jewels reported to the police, an apparent impossibility." Inspector Dawlish nodded grimly. "And the locked cabinet?" "Ah, the cabinet." Whimsy smiled wryly. "A master-stroke of misdirection. The lock, you see, was a red herring carefully, and I must say, artfully manipulated, to suggest an impossible ingress. But the real trick lay elsewhere, and here we come to the heart of the matter." He stepped over to the window, now closed, but with the catch notably untouched. This window, ostensibly secured, was indeed open just long enough for a most determined act, but not as one might suspect, for the culprit did not seek entrance through the window, but rather exit. A breath of disbelief passed through the group. The pearls, contrary to all appearances, were never removed from the cabinet. Instead, the victim herself, in a fit of despair or perhaps calculation, hid them upon her person in a manner so subtle as to defy the most cursory glance. The motive? A rather tragic cocktail of guilt and fear of scandal, and guilt of a secret past, a revelation that would have appended her carefully constructed life. He paused, eyes glinting. And the murder, the unfortunate climax to this drama, was committed by none other than the person whose role was to protect her, the very housekeeper who protested ignorance so earnestly. Mrs. Langley gasped, her composure faltering. Indeed, the key lies in the soundproof door, and the peculiarities of timing you all observed. Mrs. Langley, your knowledge of the household rhythms was both a blessing and a curse, for it allowed you to calculate precisely when the house would be silent enough to carry out your dreadful deed unnoticed. The inspector stepped forward. Mrs. Langley, you have the right to remain silent. Wait, Whimsy said, raising a hand. Before the law lays its heavy hand upon her, let us consider the human element. A woman driven to desperation, feeling betrayed and trapped, yet maintaining a facade of duty until the end. It is the very tragedy of this case. The housekeeper's shoulders slumped, the last of her defiance draining away. Lord Peter took a final draw of his cigar, exhaled slowly, and with a touch of theatrical flair, quoted with perfect disdain, "And thus I clothe my naked villainy with odd old ends stolen forth of Holy Writ." He glanced around the room. A fitting epitaph, perhaps, for a tale where appearances so cruelly deceive. With that, the room seemed to exhale, the tension easing as the truth settled, like a winter frost crisp, inevitable, and coldly logical. Whimsy's gaze lingered briefly on the portrait of Mrs. Harrington above the fireplace. Then he turned to leave, his parting words as dry and cutting as ever. Your justice, like a pearl, may be hidden beneath many layers, but eventually it is revealed by the keenest eye. And with that, Lord Peter Wimsey vanished into the night, leaving behind a household forever altered, yet curiously at peace.